Joshua chapter 8. Then Adonai said to Joshua, Do not be afraid or dismayed. Take all the people of war with you and arise. Go up to Ai. Behold, I have given the king of Ai his people, his city, and his land into your hand. Then you will do to Ai and its king as you did to Jericho and its king, except you will take its spoil and its cattle as plunder for yourselves. Set an ambush for the city behind it. So Joshua and all the people of war arose to go up to Ai. Joshua selected 30,000 men, valiant warriors, and sent them at night. He commanded them, saying, Look, you are going to ambush the city from behind it. Don't go too far from the city, but all of you be ready. Then I and all the troops with me will approach the city. Then it will be when they come out against us like the first time that we will flee before them. So they will come out after us until we have drawn them away from the city, for they will think they are fleeing before us like the first time. While we are fleeing before them, you will rise up from the ambush and take possession of the city, for Adonai your God will give it into your hand. Now, when you have seized the city, you will set the city on fire according to the word of Adonai you must do. See that you do as I have ordered you. So Joshua sent them off, and they went to the ambush site, taking position between Bethel and Ai to the west of Ai. But Joshua spent that night among the people. Then Joshua rose up early in the morning and mustered the people. He and the elders of Israel marched before the people of Ai. All the people of war with him went up, advanced, and came in front of the city. They camped to the north of Ai, with a valley between him and Ai. But he had taken about 5,000 men and set them in ambush between Bethel and Ai to the west of the city. So they stationed the people, the main army that was to the north of the city, and its rear guard to the west of the city. Then Joshua walked that night in the midst of the valley. So it came to pass, when the king of Ai saw this, the men of the city hurried and rose up early and went out to meet Israel in battle, he and all his people at the appointed place, facing the Arabah. But he did not know that there was an ambush against him behind the city. So Joshua and all Israel pretended to be beaten before them and fled by the way of the wilderness. Then all the people who were in Ai were summoned to pursue them. So they pursued Joshua and were drawn away from the city. Now a man was left in Ai or Bethel who did not go out after Israel. So they left the city open as they chased after Israel. Then Adonai said to Joshua, Stretch out the javelin that is in your hand toward Ai, but I will give it into your hand. So Joshua stretched out the javelin that was in his hand toward the city. As soon as he stretched out his hand, the ambush arose quickly from their place, ran and entered the city and captured it, and immediately set the city on fire. Now the men of Ai looked back and saw, behold, the smoke of the city rising up to the sky. They had no place to flee this way or that, since the people who had been fleeing to the wilderness turned back upon the pursuers. Then Joshua and all Israel saw that the ambush had captured the city, and that the smoke of the city rose up, and they turned back and struck down the men of Ai. The others also came out of the city against them, so they were surrounded by Israel, some on this side and some on that side. They struck them down until not one survivor or fugitive was left. But they captured the king of Ai alive and brought him to Joshua. After Israel had finished killing all the inhabitants of Ai in the field in the wilderness where they pursued them, and all of them were fallen by the edge of the sword until they were consumed, all Israel returned to Ai and struck it with the edge of the sword. All who fell that day, both men and women, were 12,000, all the people of Ai. For Joshua did not draw back his hand with which he stretched out the javelin until he had utterly destroyed all the inhabitants of Ai. Only the cattle and the spoil of the city Israel took as their plunder, according to the word of Adonai which he had commanded Joshua. So Joshua burnt Ai and made it a permanent heap of desolation to this day. Then he hanged the king of Ai on a tree until evening. At sunset Joshua commanded that they take his carcass down from the tree, cast it at the entrance of the gate of the city, and piled over it a great heap of stones, which remains to this day. Then Joshua built an altar to Adonai, God of Israel, on Mount Ebal, as Moses the servant of Adonai had commanded Bnei Israel, as written in the scroll of the Torah of Moses, an altar of uncut stones on which no man had wielded any iron tool. They offered on it burnt offerings to Adonai and sacrificed fellowship offerings. There on the stones he wrote a copy of the Torah of Moses, which he had written, in the presence of Bnei Israel. Then all Israel with their elders and officials and their judges were standing on both sides of the ark, facing the Levitical Kohanim carrying the ark of the covenant of Adonai, the outsider as well as the native born. Half of them stood in front of the Mount Gerizim, and half of them in front of Mount Ebal, just as Moshe, the servant of Adonai, had commanded before, in order to bless the people of Israel. Then afterward he read all the words of the Torah, the blessing and the curse, according to all that is written in the book of the Torah. There was not a word of all that Moshe commanded that Joshua did not read before all the assembly of Israel, including the women and the little ones and the outsiders walking among them. Chapter 9. Now when all the kings who were west of the Jordan, in the hill country, in the lowland, and along the shore of the great sea to the vicinity of Lebanon, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites heard about it, they gathered themselves together as a unified alliance to fight against Joshua in Israel. But when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard that Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they acted craftily. They went and traveled as ambassadors, took worn-out sacks of their donkeys and worn-out wineskins, cracked and patched up, along with worn-out and patched-up sandals on their feet, and worn-out clothes on them. All the bread of their provision was dry and had become crumbly. Then they went to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal and said to him, to the men of Israel, "We have come from a far country, so now make a treaty covenant with us." Then the men of Israel said to the Hivites, "Perhaps you are living among us. How then should we make a covenant with you?" But they said to Joshua, "We are your servants." Then Joshua asked them, "Who are you? Where do you come from?" So they replied to them, "Your servants have come from a very distant country because of the name of Adonai your God. For we have heard the report of him and all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to King Sihon and Heshbon, and to King of Og of Bashan, who was at Ashtaroth. So our elders and all the inhabitants of our country spoke to us, saying, 'Take provisions in your hand for the journey. Go to meet them and say to them, "We will be your subjects. So now make a treaty covenant with us. This is our bread, which was hot when we took it for our provision from our homes on the day we left to come to you. But now behold, it is dry and crumbly. And these wineskins, which were new when we filled them, but now they are cracked. Also these are our garments, and our sandals are worn out because of the very long journey." So the men of Israel took some of their provision and did not seek counsel from Adonai's mouth. So Joshua made peace with them and cut a covenant with them to let them live, and the leaders of the community swore to them. But it came about to the end of 3 days after they had cut a covenant with them, they heard that they were their neighbors and were living among them. So Bnei Israel journeyed and came to their cities on the 3rd day. Now their cities were Gibeon, Chephirah, Be'eroth, and Kiriath Jearim. But Bnei Israel did not strike them, because of the leaders of the community had sworn to them by Adonai, God of Israel. Then the entire community murmured against the leaders, But all the leaders answered the entire community, "We have sworn to them by Adonai, God of Israel, so we cannot touch them. This is what we will do to them. We will let them live, lest wrath be upon us because of the oath which we swore to them. Yes, let them live." The leader said further, "But let them chop wood and draw water for the entire community." So the leaders decreed concerning them. Then Joshua summoned them, and he spoke to them, saying, "Why have you deceived us, saying, 'We are very far from you,' when you are living among us? Now therefore we are cursed, and you will never cease to be servants, wood choppers, and water carriers for the house of my God." So they answered Joshua, saying, "It was because your servants were clearly told that Adonai your God had commanded his servant Moshe to give you all the land and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land before you. So we are very afraid for our lives because of you, and so we did this. Now behold, we are in your hand. Whatever seems good and right in your eyes, do to us. Do." Thus he did to them, delivering them from the hand of Bnei Israel, so they did not slay them. On that day Joshua made them wood choppers and water carriers for the community and for the altar of Adonai in the place which he would choose. So it is to this day. Chapter 10. Now it came to pass that Adonai Zedek, king of Jerusalem, heard that Joshua had taken Ai and had utterly destroyed it. Adoni Zedek, king of Jerusalem, heard that Joshua had taken Ai and had utterly destroyed it, just as he had done to Jericho and its king, so he had done to Ai and its king, and that the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel and remained among them. So he feared greatly, because Gibeon was a large city, as one of the royal cities, in fact larger than Ai, and all its men were mighty. Therefore Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, sent word to Hoham, king of Hebron, Piram, king of Jarmuth, Japhia, king of Lachish, and Debir, king of Eglon, saying, "Come up and help me. Let's attack Gibeon, for it has made peace with Joshua and Bnei Israel." So the 5 kings of the Amorites, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon, gathered themselves and went up. They and all the armies camped against Gibeon and attacked it. Then the men of Gibeon sent word to Joshua in camp at Gilgal, saying, "Don't abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us. Help us, for all the kings of the Amorites living in the hill country have gathered against us." So Joshua went up from Gilgal, and he and all the people of war with him, and all the mighty men of valor. Adonai said to Joshua, "Do not fear them, for I have given them into your hand. Not one of them will stand before you." So Joshua came upon them suddenly by marching all night from Gilgal. Adonai threw them into confusion before Israel, defeated them with a crushing defeat at Gibeon, chased them by the road that goes up to Beth Horon, and struck them as far as Azekah and Mekkedah. While they were fleeing before Israel down the descendants of Beth Horon, Adonai cast down great stones from heaven on them all the way to Azekah, so they died. More of them died from the hailstones than those Bnei Israel killed with the sword. Then Joshua spoke to Adonai on the day of Adonai gave the Amorites over to Bnei Israel, and said in the eyes of Israel, "Sun, stand still over Gibeon, moon over the Aijalon valley." So the sun stood still and the moon stopped until the nation took vengeance on its enemies. Is it not written in the book of Jashar? Thus the sun halted in the middle of the sky and did not hurry to go down for about a full day. There was no day like that before it or after it, when Adonai listened to the voice of a man, for Adonai fought for Israel. Then Joshua and all Israel with him returned to the camp at Gilgal. Now these 5 kings fled and hid themselves in a cave at Makkedah. So it was reported to Joshua, the 5 kings are found hidden in the cave at Makkedah. Joshua said, "Roll large stones onto the mouth of the cave. Assign men over it to guard them, but don't stay there yourselves. Chase after your armies, chase after your enemies and attack them at the rear. Don't let them enter their cities, for Adonai your God has given them into your hand." So it was that Joshua and Bnei Israel finished striking them with a very great slaughter until they were wiped out, though some of their survivors escaped into the fortified cities. Then all the people returned safely to Joshua in the camp at Makkedah. No one dared sharpen his tongue against Bnei Israel. Then Joshua said, "Open the mouth of the cave and bring out those 5 kings to me from the cave." So they did so and brought out those 5 kings to him from the cave: the king of Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Rachish, and Eglon. Then they brought out those kings to Joshua. Joshua summoned all the men of Israel and said to the chief of the men of war who had gone with them, "Come forward and put your feet on the necks of these kings." So they came forward and put their net on their necks. Then Joshua said to them, "Never fear or be dismayed. Chazak, be strong, for thus will Adonai do to all your enemies whom you will fight." After this, Joshua struck them and put them to death. Then hanged them on 5 trees, and they remained hanging on the trees until evening. It came about at sunset that Joshua commanded that they be taken down from the trees and thrown into the cave where they had hidden themselves. Then they placed large stones at the mouth of the cave, which are there to this very day. On that day Joshua captured Makkedah and struck it and its kings with the edge of the sword, putting it and every single soul in it under a ban of destruction, leaving no survivors. So he did to the king of Makkedah as he had done to the king of Jericho. Then Joshua and all Israel with him passed on from Makkedah to Libnah and fought against Libnah. Adonai also gave it with its king into the hand of Israel. So he struck it and every single soul in it with the edge of the sword, leaving no survivors in it. So he did to its king as he had done to the king of Jericho. Then Joshua and all people with him passed on from Libnah into Lachish, camped against it, and fought against it. Adonai delivered Lachish into the hand of Israel. So he captured it on the 2nd day and struck it and every single soul in it with the edge of the sword, just as he had done to Libnah. Then Horam king of Gezer came up to help Lachish, but Joshua defeated him and his people until he had left him no survivors. Then Joshua and all Israel with him passed on from Lachish to Eglon, camped against it, and fought against it. They captured it on that day and struck it and every single soul in it with the edge of the sword, putting them under the ban that day, just as he had done to Lachish. Then Joshua and all Israel with him went up from Eglon to Hebron, and they fought against it. They captured it, struck it and its king, all its towns, and every single soul that was in it with the edge of the sword, leaving no survivors, just as he had done to Eglon, putting it and every single soul in it under the ban. Then Joshua and all Israel with him turned back to David and fought against it. He captured it and its king and all its towns, struck them with the edge of the sword, and put every single soul in it under the ban, leaving no survivors, just as he had done to Hebron. So he did to David and its king as he had also done to Libnah and its king. So Joshua conquered the entire country, the hill country, the Negev, the lowland, and the slopes, with all their kings. He left no survivors, but he put everything that breathed under the ban, just as Adonai, God of Israel, had commanded. Thus Joshua defeated them from Kadesh Barnea to Gaza, all the country of Goshen, as far as Gibeon. Thus Joshua captured all those kings and their lands at a single stroke, because Adonai, God of Israel, fought for Israel. Then Joshua and all Israel with him returned to the camp at Gilgal.